Good evening and welcome. Let's start with our big story. Anticipation in the air, expectations running high. An election with far-reaching implications for the world. It is Election Day in the United States of America. Voters are writing the final chapter of this historic presidential election. A record number of early voters is a crucial sign in itself. Nearly 100 million Americans had already cast their ballots before the day even dawned. Now, Voice of America's White House correspondent, Patsy Vidakuswara, is joining us live from Washington, D.C. for more on this. Welcome. Thanks for being with us. Now, Election Day is here. Voting has started. So where are the contenders and what are they doing now as the U.S. votes?
Well, right now at the White House, where we are just waiting for the president to leave the White House to go to the Republican campaign headquarters in a nearby town called Arlington. This is in the state of Virginia. Meanwhile, Joe Biden, this morning, as you mentioned, he visited his church and the family burial site at the church, as well as his childhood home in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where, just to add a little bit of color here, he wrote in one of the walls, "From this house to the White House, November 3rd, 2020, by the grace of God, Joe Biden." Joe Biden will be campaigning still in Scranton, Pennsylvania, his hometown as a boy, as well as in Philadelphia, while President Trump will not be campaigning any longer after this, blitz over the weekend of 10 campaign stops in so many states over the weekend. He will be at the White House watching the election returns, while Joe Biden will be in Wilmington, Delaware, to watch the returns of the election with his running mate Kamala Harris.
Right, and what are some of the states to watch out for, the so-called swing states, and when can we expect to know the results?
Right, so this is something that perhaps your viewers need to know, is that the elections in the U.S. is not based on popular vote, but it's based on what's called electoral college votes. What this means is that each state is allocated a certain number of votes based on their population, but the majority of states have a winner-takes-all system. This is 48 out of 50 states, and only 2 have a proportional system. Which means what? Which means that there's a handful of states which are called the swing states, which could go either Republican or Democrat, and the vast majority always goes to one party or another. And the states to watch for tonight is Pennsylvania and Florida, as well as about 4 other states, including Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida. So the key tonight is Florida, because the way the states have different laws. The U.S. is also a federation of states where it's not one election day for the entire country, but think of it as 50 different elections, because each state has different regulations. And Florida is one of those states that can count their votes early, so we may know the results of Florida tonight, but not so the case of Pennsylvania. We may have to wait for tomorrow, even a couple of days. But those 2 states are really crucial for a Trump victory, a path to 270 electoral votes that he needs out of 538 to be able to keep the White House.
Right, and Patsy, several businesses across the United States we have seen have been bracing for potential trouble on the streets in case of disputed results. Is there a likelihood of election violence?
Yeah, so this is something that both sides are quite concerned about. Post-election litigation is definite, because right now there's already hundreds of lawsuits around the country, talking about how ballots should be distributed, how ballots should be counted. These are all already going on. Now, the concern about post-election friction and violence is certainly a big concern, particularly because the president, as we know, a couple of weeks ago, has refused to commit to a peaceful transfer of power and has several times signaled to his supporters that unless he is declared the winner, the election is rigged, and not accept the results of the election. So these are, of course, concerning to everybody. As far as I've heard from election officials, local election officials, as well as local law enforcement, they're really bracing up and trying to make sure that everybody can vote safely and that the votes can be counted safely.
Right. Now, this has been termed as the most divisive election. 2 very different candidates, 2 very different schools of thought, 2 very different approaches, and some of the biggest issues facing the U.S. at the moment. Where are we now?
Definitely the biggest issue is the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, the statistics in the U.S., more than 9 million cases, over 230 deaths in the country. And so what Joe Biden has tried to do is definitely try to frame the election as a referendum on the president's handling of the pandemic. Meanwhile, the president is trying to say that only he can return the country back to its pre-pandemic prosperity with his tax cuts, with his deregulation. So those two competing issues, the pandemic and pandemic economic recovery, has been the main thing that's been, kind of overshadowing the whole election. But other than that, of course, the allegations from the president's side that Joe Biden wants to turn the country into a socialist country. He wants to raise taxes. He will be weak on law and order. This is another thing. As you know, the U.S. is rocked continuously by these racial justice movements since the death of George Floyd in May. So these are all big issues that are definitely on voters' minds as they go to the polling booth today, or as they have casted their votes. So far, more than 100 million people in the U.S. have done that.
Patsy, thank you very much for joining us, White House correspondent, bringing us all the latest on the ongoing U.S. elections.